Hi folks, I had a couple questions about the work for this week, so I wanted to do a video to walk you through it a little bit. Um, the main thing to do is to work on essay 2, which is the definition essay. So let me click into that and we'll look at that for a minute. Okay, so essay 2, the idea is to define what a visionary is by looking at what are the traits common to visionaries. You have the 4 women in the book, but I'd like you also to think about a visionary more generally. So this is the central question you want to address in your essay. What creates a visionary? So what aspects of their personal history, their character traits, something about their timing, or any other similarities that you can find. So you have, in essence, these 4 case studies of visionaries, and what you're looking for are the commonalities, the things that they have in common. So you each had read one of the women, about one of the women, so you're an expert on one of the women. Now, to look at what they have in common, you have to think about the other women as well that you hadn't read about. So the the process I came up with, I didn't want to make everybody have to read the whole book because um, I just didn't want to take the time. I want to focus on writing and not take that much time reading. So I was hoping that by having several of you become experts on each of the women, that you could share what you'd learned about the women, so that people could learn about them without having to read the whole chapter. So this would be the first thing that you need to do, to think about what the other women are like. Now, there are ways, if certainly you're welcome to read the whole book if you have the time. I know I talked to um, one student who already had read the whole book. So you may have read some of it. You may have been curious about some of the other women. So that's fine if you have the time to do that. But you have some other options. One is to look at the essays that people had written about those women. And if you go back to the assignment page for a couple weeks ago, I think in 2 of the assignments, I list the reading assignments so you can see who wrote about which women. And I right here, I forgot that I'd written this to make recommendations about who I thought had written the most successful essays about each woman. I'll try to pop that in here shortly. The other thing you can do, and the other strategy here, was this Google Doc. So the idea of the Google Doc for last week was to collect up the information about the different traits that the women had, um, and to give either some quotes or some information about what gives some evidence for those particular traits. So if you have put page numbers in there, that gives people who haven't read about the woman an idea where they might go in the chapter to get some evidence. So the Google Doc, as I wrote at the top of the assignment, there was some misunderstanding about how I wanted the Google Doc organized. My idea was that we were going to organize it by trait, and then these were some sample traits, and some of you came up with some really good ideas for some other ones that weren't listed here, which is fine. To list the trait and then the 4 women with the evidence, so you can see. Well, that's going to match up to the organization of your essay. So what I went and did is um, I reorganized this whole Google Doc so it's by trait and not by woman. So the traits are listed at the top of a page, and then the women, and I kept everybody's name so I can make sure to give credit for them. So there was some information about being brave or fearless about Rachel Carson and Jane Jacobs that 2 of the women, 2 of the 2 students came up with. So there may be information. Maybe Alice Waters showed some bravery. Maybe uh, who's the other one? Jane Goodall showed some bravery. So some of you might want to go back in and add information once you see what we've got here, especially if you decide you want to write about bravery or fearlessness. So if you go down, so we've got bravery, being motivated or determined. Some of them, the quotes didn't quite fit under the category, but I did the best I could to sort of put things into categories. So this one, see, we've got information about all 5 of the women. Everybody seemed to do quotes rather than information about what the women did, but you also could have listed, it wouldn't have to necessarily be a quote. You could have said, Jane Goodall is brave, for example, when she sails off to Africa by herself, or when she goes off into the bush, or whatever it is. You could have described the circumstances that showed her bravery. So we've got a number of traits here. I tried to use red to help you see them. Observant, open-minded. I think that's a really useful one. Close relationship to mother or family. And now at the end here, there were a number of traits that people identified that where they were the only person that noticed this. Certainly, intelligence is going to be applicable probably to most of these women, but Shantae was the only one that pointed that out for Rachel Carson. Now, some of you that did the other women might have evidence for their intelligence. Stress, that was an interesting one. So these are some odds and ends of things that that maybe you can do something with if you've read about some of the other women and you think, oh, that's a good point to make. Implacable, idealistic. So there were some good ones here. Okay, so this is reorganized. I had a student last semester who said that when she actually did her own essay, she did the same kind of a thing. So she set up her own Google Doc and put the information. She decided on the traits that she wanted to focus on, and she put the information about each of the women there, and that was a useful part of her pre-writing. So you might want to think about that. Okay, so let me get back to the assignment and just talk about that a little bit. Okay, so you need to decide, you're going to need to talk about at least 3 of the 4 women, so you don't have to cover everybody. And you want to think about, okay, what traits do you want to focus on? I would look for ones that maybe are, I don't want to say unusual, but look for something where you think you're really saying something interesting, that you're not just saying, being determined and curious and whatever. Those are, well, curious I think is a good one to do. Determined is sort of a, maybe, there are a lot of people that write about the women being determined. So try to find something that's maybe got a little bit of a different slant to it. That's why I like that implacable, because I hadn't seen anybody else use that particular word, and I thought that was might be a good angle to take. Now I'm going to get everybody writing about implacability, but okay. So you want a tentative thesis. The thesis will identify the traits that are in common for these women. Then what you need to do is gather up some information, because you need evidence from the book. Quotations serve as evidence, but also facts and information from the book. If you use quotations, you'll use page numbers for citation. Oh, this is not what that's talking about, though. Use some of the page numbers given in the Google Doc to look at context for the quotes. So when you see that page number, you might read the information around that and get some more information so that you can flesh that out a little bit. This drafting section talks about organization. The body, it seems to me to make sense to write the body paragraphs first. I had a number of students last semester who didn't pay attention to this, and they wrote their first draft talking woman by woman. So they would talk about Rachel Carson, and they talk about her traits, and then they talk about Jane Goodall, and then they talk about her traits, and then Alice Waters and her traits. Your thesis statement is identifying traits, so that really should be the organization of your essay. So you'd go trait by trait, and then talk. So one of the important. So you have a thesis statement that's, I mean, a topic sentence in the paragraph that'll say something like, um, curiosity is a very important trait um, for a visionary. Um, Alice Waters, for example, demonstrated this when she did Bloody Blah, and Jane Goodall was curious when she, you know, wanted to understand how the chimpanzees related to each other, or whatever. So you'll talk about the paragraph will, as you'll have a topic sentence that'll establish the trait that you're going to be discussing, and then you'll have examples from each of the women that you're going to talk about. You do not need to talk about you're going to have at least three women that you talk about in your essay as a whole. Within each paragraph, um, you have to discuss the essay as a whole must discuss you have to discuss at least two of the four women, so you don't have to say something about each of the three that you're discussing in every paragraph. If you want to talk about all four women, that's fine. If you try to fit four women in a paragraph, it's gonna be a little cumbersome with the transitions back and forth, so I wouldn't suggest doing that, but certainly you can talk about all four women in the essay as a whole. Quotations or paraphrases. Okay, so those are the body paragraphs. Um, the introductory paragraph and the concluding paragraphs, as always, are a little tricky. You want to say something about visionaries. You want to say something about how these particular women from the book are case studies, and how you're generalizing from these women to say something more generally about visionaries. Um, you want to try to and then you'll have you want to try to have something that engages the reader's attention. Sharp details are one of the best ways to do that. A little bit of humor or some really effective use of language can do that as well. And then the first paragraph will end with your thesis statement, which identifies those particular qualities of women, visionaries, that these women demonstrate. Um, the conclusion, um, you want to, obviously, a conclusion is a summary in part, but you want to do more than just a summary. The summary should be brief. This isn't a long essay. Your reader already has read about the four traits, however many traits you identify. You don't need to just rehash what you've just said. So you want to try to deepen or extend or reflect. Um, you might make some commentary on um, the value of visionaries, or as I say here, how we can create conditions in schools or in our families to create more visionaries. You might make some commentary on the role of gender, since the book central argument of the book seems to be that women were particularly suited at this point in history in the 60s to be the ones that were visionaries. They were the outsiders, and that seems to be an important component of a visionary. Um, okay, so that's the rough draft. Don't, um, remember it's a rough draft. You'll have a chance to do some revision. We will do peer review for this one, um, and I'll give you some comments as always. The criteria for the grading, again, for final drafts are listed down here, but there's something to keep in mind when you're doing your rough draft as well, that you have a clear, arguable thesis statement. I'm really going to focus on paragraph structure, that the paragraphs are unified and coherent, logically organized. MLA documentation, we have a single source here. If you want to use an additional source, you're welcome to do it. I have had students in the past um, got some information about um, visionaries more generally from another source, and they used that to kind of beef up the introduction. You're welcome to do that. You don't need to do more research to find out information about these particular women. So we're kind of easing into documentation with this use of a single source. That's one of the reasons for the structuring of the course like this. Your next assignment, we'll be talking about finding sources, and you'll be doing a few assignments that have multiple sources. So you've got that to look forward to in different types of sources. Okay, so I hope that helps. One more thing. I did in the assignment suggest here that another way that you might get information about these women, if you um, have one woman in particular that you're a little bit weak on, and you haven't found much from the Google Doc that fits what you want to say, um, by all means, I'd encourage people to use this comment section below this assignment, leave a reply, to kind of send out a call for help. So if so you can just do a comment, something like this, that you've got an idea to write about curiosity. Can somebody, the person who people who wrote about whoever it is, Alice Waters, um, give you some help about where how she showed curiosity. Um, so you can put out a call for some help. Keep an eye on the comment section so that you can help somebody else out. And I tried to give you a little incentive here. So please check to see if anyone is asking about your woman, so to speak, um, and respond with some helpful information and or page references. And I will give you some extra credit. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to work that out, but maybe as punctuality points or something. I'll give you extra credit for the people that help others out. There is, before you start the essay, as I say here, there are a couple things to read about paragraph structure and the use of topic sentences and developing strong thesis statements that I'd like you to look at, and then jump into the rough draft. Next week, this is a little. I don't know how. I'm anticipating it might take you a while to do this assignment because you're trying to gather up the information, from the women that you haven't really focused on. So I wanted to just give you that to do. Um, Next week, we're going to jump into citation, and there'll be some reading to do, and we'll be finding some sources and doing a short writing assignment. Um, so anyway, if you have questions, feel free to either email me, or you can post a question in addition to a request for help. You could post a question for me on the assignments here. All right, I'm working at getting the essay ones graded. They should be out in the next day or so. Um, and I know I have a little bit more grading to catch up on. Um, but anyway, good luck. Stay in touch. Um, Looking forward to seeing what you can do with this assignment.